Everyone in that hospital corridor froze when the police dog suddenly stopped walking and let out a sound his handler had only heard once before. It was a low, mournful whine that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than instinct, deeper than training. The kind of sound that made grown men hold their breath and pray they were wrong about what it meant. Officer Jake Mendez felt his blood turn to ice because he recognized that sound. He had heard it only once in 7 years of working alongside his K-9 partner. It was the exact same sound Kodi made the night they discovered a body in the woods of Bastrop State Park. And now, that same haunting cry was directed at a closed hospital door. Room 214. The Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, where a 3-week-old baby had not moved a single muscle since the day he was born. What happened in the next 7 minutes would leave doctors completely speechless and spark an investigation that would reach medical researchers, animal behaviorists, and neurologists across the entire country. Because what that police dog did next was something no one could explain. Something that defied everything we thought we knew about the connection between animals and humans. And by the time the sun broke through those hospital blinds for the first time in weeks, nothing would ever be the same again. If you are new to this channel and you love stories that touch your heart and remind you that miracles still happen in this world, then you are exactly where you need to be. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now and tap the notification bell so you never miss a single story. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you believe animals can sense things that humans cannot? I want to hear your thoughts. And if this story moves you, share it with someone who needs a reason to believe in hope today. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. St. Luke's Regional Medical Center sits on the east side of Austin, Texas. It is a sprawling complex of beige brick and tinted windows, surrounded by oak trees that have stood for over 100 years. During the day, the parking lot fills with families carrying flowers and balloons, their faces painted with cautious optimism. But at night, the hospital takes on a different character. The hallways grow quiet. The fluorescent lights flicker with an almost hypnotic rhythm, and the air becomes thick with something unspoken. Grief. Fear. The desperate prayers of mothers and fathers who are running out of hope. The Pediatric Intensive Care Unit was located on the second floor, at the end of a long corridor that always seemed colder than the rest of the building. Nurses spoke in hushed tones here. Footsteps were softer. Even the machines seemed to beep with a kind of reverence, as if they understood that behind each of these doors, a family was fighting a battle they might not win. Room 214 was the last door on the left. The blinds were always drawn. The lights were always dim. And for 19 days, the only sounds that came from inside were the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the quiet sobs of a young mother who had stopped believing in miracles. Her name was Jessica Parker. She was 26 years old, with dark hair that she used to wear in loose curls, but now pulled back in a messy ponytail she had not changed in days. Her eyes, once bright and full of laughter, were now ringed with shadows so deep they looked like bruises. She had not eaten a full meal in over 2 weeks. She had not slept more than an hour at a time. And she had not left her son's side for even a moment. Mason James Parker was born 5 weeks early on a cold November morning. The delivery had been brutal. Umbilical cord complications led to severe oxygen deprivation. By the time the medical team stabilized the tiny newborn, the damage had already been done. His brain had been starved of oxygen for far too long. The neurons that should have been firing with the electricity of new life were instead dark and silent. Dr. Elizabeth Chun was the attending neurologist assigned to Mason's case. She was a woman of precision and calm, known for delivering even the most devastating news with a steady voice and compassionate eyes. But even she struggled to find the right words when she sat down with Jessica 3 days after the delivery. Severe neurological impairment. That was the phrase she used. She explained that Mason showed no voluntary movement, no response to touch, no reaction to sound or light. His brain activity was minimal, barely registering on the monitors that tracked his every function. When Jessica asked what that meant, Dr. Chun hesitated for a long moment before answering. "It means we do not know if he will ever wake up." Those words shattered something inside Jessica that she did not know could break. She had spent 9 months dreaming about this baby. She had painted his nursery a soft shade of blue. She had folded tiny onesies and arranged stuffed animals on the shelf above his crib. She had whispered to him every night, telling him about the life they would build together. About his father, who was serving overseas but would be home soon. About the dog they would get when he was older. about the baseball games and birthday parties and lazy Sunday mornings that awaited them. None of that mattered now. Now, there was only this room. This incubator. This tiny body that refused to move. Jessica's husband, Sergeant David Parker, was stationed overseas on his third deployment. He had missed their wedding anniversary. He had missed Thanksgiving. But he had promised her, with absolute certainty, that he would be there when their son arrived. He swore he would hold that baby in his arms before anyone else. But Mason came early. And David was 7,000 miles away, unable to get emergency leave, unable to do anything but stare at his phone and pray for updates that never brought good news. Every night, Jessica would video call him from the hospital room. She would hold the phone up so he could see their son, motionless in the incubator, and they would sit in silence together, separated by oceans and time zones and a grief so heavy it felt like drowning. On the 19th day, the hospital chaplain visited Jessica for the second time. She knew what that meant. She had seen him making rounds before, always appearing when families needed to prepare for the worst. When he sat down beside her and asked how she was holding up, she did not answer. She simply turned back to the incubator and placed her hand against the glass, as if somehow her touch could reach through and pull her son back from whatever darkness held him. Outside the window, the Texas sky was gray and heavy with clouds that had not released their rain in days. The world itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to break. And then, at exactly 9:47 in the morning, something did. Not in room 214. Not yet. It started 3 floors below, in the main lobby of St. Luke's Regional Medical Center, where a police officer and his K-9 partner had just arrived for a routine community outreach event. Officer Jake Mendez had done dozens of these visits before. Schools, libraries, community centers. It was good publicity for the department and a chance for kids to meet a real working police dog. Kodi was always well behaved during these events, patient with the endless petting and photographs, calm even when children squealed with excitement. But today was different. Today, Kodi refused to enter the elevator. He planted his paws on the polished hospital floor and would not move. His ears rotated forward. His nose dropped to the ground. And then, without any warning, he pulled hard against his leash and began walking toward the east corridor. Jake called his name, ordered him to heel. But for the first time in 7 years, Kodi ignored every command. And as the dog disappeared around the corner, heading straight toward the pediatric intensive care unit, Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Because Kodi was never wrong. Whatever he had sensed in this hospital, it was something that could not wait. Kodi was not always the decorated police dog that Officer Jake Mendez trusted with his life. 7 years ago, he was just another Belgian Malinois puppy at the Austin Police Department K-9 training facility, and most handlers wanted nothing to do with him. He was too aggressive, too unpredictable, too intense. The trainers called him a liability. They said he would never make it through the program. They recommended he be released and sent to a shelter where maybe, if he was lucky, some family would take a chance on a dog that nobody else wanted. But Jake Mendez saw something different when he looked into those sharp, intelligent eyes. He did not see a problem. He saw potential. He saw a dog that was not disobedient, but rather operating on a level that most humans could not understand. Kodi did not ignore commands because he was defiant. He ignored them because his instincts were already 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. He could sense things before they happened. He could smell danger before it arrived. He could feel the shift in the air when something was wrong, even when every human around him remained completely unaware. Jake fought for Kodi when no one else would. He convinced his superiors to give the dog one more chance. And over the next 6 months, he transformed that unruly puppy into the most reliable K-9 partner the Austin Police Department had ever seen. Together, they became legendary. They tracked escaped convicts through the brutal Texas heat, following trails that had gone cold for hours. They located missing children in flooded creek beds when search parties had already given up hope. They worked crime scenes that would haunt most officers for the rest of their lives, and through it all, Kodi never faltered. He never hesitated. He never let Jake down. In 7 years of active duty, Kodi had received 3 commendations for bravery. He had been featured in local news stories and invited to schools across the Austin area. Children adored him. Fellow officers respected him. And Jake loved him like family. But there was one thing about Kodi that Jake never discussed with anyone. One sound that the dog had made only once in all their years together. A sound that still visited Jake in his nightmares when the nights grew too quiet. It happened 2 years ago, during a search operation in Bastrop State Park. A hiker had gone missing 3 days earlier, and by the time the search teams were deployed, hope was already fading. Jake and Kodi were assigned to cover the eastern quadrant, a dense stretch of woodland where the pine trees grew so thick that sunlight barely touched the forest floor. They had been searching for hours when Kodi suddenly stopped walking. His ears flattened against his head. His body went rigid. And then he released a sound that Jake had never heard before and prayed he would never hear again. It was a low, mournful whine that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. It was not a bark. It was not a growl. It was something deeper. Something almost human in its sorrow. Jake knew immediately what it meant. He followed Kodi through the underbrush, pushing past branches and stepping over fallen logs, until they reached a small clearing where the missing hiker lay motionless beneath a canopy of shadows. She had been gone for at least 2 days. There was nothing anyone could have done. But Kodi had known. He had sensed death before Jake could see it. Before the evidence was visible. Before any human could have possibly understood what they were walking toward. That sound haunted Jake for months afterward. He heard it in his dreams. He heard it in the quiet moments between calls. And he swore to himself that if he ever heard it again, he would prepare himself for the worst. So when Kodi stopped in that hospital corridor and released that exact same mournful whine, Jake felt his entire body go cold. His hands began to tremble. His heart pounded against his ribs like a trapped animal fighting for escape. Because Kodi was staring at a door. Room 214. The Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. And every instinct Jake had developed over 15 years of police work was screaming at him that something terrible waited on the other side. He should have pulled Kodi back. He should have followed protocol and returned to the community event downstairs where smiling children were waiting to meet a friendly police dog. But Jake could not move. He could not look away from that door. And when Kodi took a step forward, Jake followed. The hallway was silent except for the soft hum of machines and the distant murmur of voices from the nurses' station. The air grew colder as they approached room 214. Jake could smell antiseptic and something else beneath it. Something heavier. Grief, perhaps. Or despair. The kind of emotion that seeps into walls and lingers long after the people who created it have gone. Kodi stopped directly in front of the door. His nose pressed against the gap at the bottom, inhaling deeply. His ears rotated forward with intense focus. And then he did something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. He sat down. In all their years together, Kodi had never voluntarily stopped during a track. When he sensed something, he pursued it relentlessly until he found the source. He did not pause. He did not wait. But now, he was sitting perfectly still, his eyes locked on that closed door, his body trembling with an energy that Jake could not identify. It was not aggression. It was not fear. It was something else entirely. Something that looked almost like recognition. As if Kodi had found exactly what he was searching for and was now waiting for permission to continue. Jake reached for the door handle. His fingers wrapped around the cold metal. He knew he should knock. He knew he should announce himself. But something told him that the moment he opened this door, nothing would ever be the same again. He pushed it open. The room was dim, lit only by the pale glow of medical monitors and a thin strip of gray light that crept through the drawn blinds. The air was thick and warm, heavy with the smell of sterilized equipment and something else. Something soft and heartbreaking. The scent of a mother who had been crying for days. Jessica Parker sat in a chair beside an incubator, her body hunched forward, her hand pressed against the glass. She did not turn when the door opened. She did not acknowledge the officer or the dog that had just entered her son's room. She simply stared at the tiny motionless figure inside that plastic chamber, her lips moving in silent prayers that had gone unanswered for 19 days. Jake opened his mouth to apologize for the intrusion. He was about to explain that his dog had broken protocol and that they would leave immediately. But before he could speak a single word, Kodi moved past him and walked directly toward the incubator. His steps were slow, deliberate, almost reverent, as if he understood that this was sacred ground, that the small life contained within that chamber was fighting a battle that no one else could see. Jessica finally turned. Her eyes, red and swollen from countless tears, widened with confusion and something that might have been fear. She opened her mouth to protest, to demand an explanation, to protect her son from this unexpected intrusion. But then she saw the way Kodi was looking at Mason. The dog's entire demeanor had changed. The intensity was gone. The rigid focus had softened into something almost tender. He approached the incubator with a gentleness that seemed impossible for an animal trained to take down armed criminals. His nose hovered just inches from the glass, and his breathing slowed until it matched the faint rhythm of the monitors. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sounds in the room were the steady beeping of machines and the soft whisper of Kodi's breath against the incubator glass. And then, without warning, he released that sound again. The low, mournful whine that Jake had heard only once before. The sound of recognition. The sound of knowing. Jake's heart stopped. He was certain now. Certain that Kodi had sensed what the doctors could not admit. That this baby was slipping away. That the fight was almost over. That death was already present in this room, waiting patiently in the shadows for its moment to arrive. But then something happened that changed everything Jake thought he understood about his dog. About instinct. About the invisible threads that connect living beings in ways science cannot explain. Kodi stopped whining. He lifted his head. And he looked directly at Jake with an expression that the officer had never seen before. It was not sorrow. It was not resignation. It was determination. Kodi had sensed something in this room. Something beyond the grief and the despair and the medical monitors that tracked a fading life. He had detected a spark buried so deep beneath the silence that no human could have possibly found it. And now, he was asking permission to do something about it. Jake did not understand. He could not have known what would happen next. But in that moment, standing in the dim light of room 214, watching his dog communicate something that words could never capture, he made a decision that would alter the course of 3 lives forever. He let go of the leash. The leash hit the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the silent room like a gunshot. Jake did not know why he released it. Every protocol he had ever learned screamed at him to maintain control of his K-9 partner at all times. Every regulation demanded that he immediately retrieve the dog and remove him from this unauthorized situation. But something in Kodi's eyes had spoken to a part of Jake that existed beyond training manuals and departmental guidelines. Something ancient and instinctive had passed between them in that moment. A silent communication that Jake could not explain but could not ignore. Jessica Parker rose from her chair so quickly that it scraped against the floor with a harsh sound that shattered the stillness. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of confusion and protective fury that only a mother can summon when she perceives a threat to her child. She stepped between Kodi and the incubator, her thin frame trembling but her stance defiant. She had spent 19 days watching her son slip further into silence. She had endured countless tests and consultations and pitying glances from medical staff who had already given up hope. She had nothing left except this room and this baby and the desperate belief that as long as she stood guard, death could not take him. She would not let a stranger's dog change that. "Get him out of here," she said, her voice cracking but firm. "Get him out right now." Jake stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. I don't know what happened. He's never done anything like this before. Let me just—" But Kodi was not listening to either of them. The Belgian Malinois moved with a calm purpose that seemed almost supernatural. He did not lunge. He did not bark. He simply walked around Jessica with the same deliberate grace he used when tracking a scent through miles of wilderness. His eyes never left the incubator. His breathing remained slow and steady. And when Jessica tried to step in front of him again, he paused and looked up at her with an expression that stopped her cold. It was not aggression. It was not dominance. It was something far more unsettling. It was compassion. Jessica felt her legs weaken beneath her. She had looked into many eyes over the past 19 days. Doctors who spoke in careful medical terminology to distance themselves from the tragedy. Nurses who offered sympathy but could not hide their resignation. Family members who called with voices full of tears and empty promises that everything would be okay. But none of them had looked at her the way this dog was looking at her now. As if he understood her pain. As if he shared it. As if he had come here specifically to do something about it. "What does he want?" she whispered, the anger draining from her voice and leaving only exhaustion behind. Jake shook his head slowly. "I don't know. I honestly don't know. But Kodi has never been wrong about anything. Not once in 7 years. Whatever he's sensing in this room, whatever drew him here, I think we need to let him show us. It was an insane suggestion. Jessica knew that. Allowing a police dog to approach her critically ill newborn was not just unconventional, it was potentially dangerous. But something in those canine eyes held her frozen in place. Something that whispered of possibilities she had stopped believing in. Something that felt like the first breath of hope she had experienced since the moment Dr. Chun delivered her devastating diagnosis. She stepped aside. Kodi moved forward until his nose was nearly touching the incubator glass. He inhaled deeply, drawing in scents that no human could detect. The sterile plastic of medical equipment. The chemical signature of medications flowing through tiny veins. The biological markers of a body struggling to survive. And beneath all of that, something else. Something faint but unmistakable. A spark. Deep within the silence of Mason's unresponsive body, buried beneath layers of neurological damage and medical pessimism, there was still a fight happening. A battle being waged on a cellular level that no monitor could measure. The machines tracked heartbeats and oxygen levels and brain activity, but they could not detect the fundamental will to live that flickered like a candle flame in a dark room. Kodi could smell it. And in that moment, he made a decision that no amount of police training had prepared him for. He rose up on his hind legs with a grace that seemed impossible for an 80-pound working dog. His front paws lifted from the ground and reached toward the incubator with deliberate intention. Jessica gasped and stepped forward instinctively, her hands outstretched to protect her son from whatever was about to happen. "Stop him!" she cried out, her voice sharp with renewed panic. "He's going to hurt him." Jake lunged forward to grab Kodi's collar. His fingers brushed against the leather but could not find purchase as the dog completed his movement with surprising speed. For one terrible second, everyone in the room believed they were about to witness a tragedy. That this animal, no matter how well trained, was about to do something that could not be undone. But Kodi did not attack. He did not scratch or paw at the incubator. He did not try to breach the protective barrier that separated him from the infant inside. Instead, with a gentleness that brought tears to Jake's eyes, he placed his front paws on the edge of the incubator and lowered his head until it rested against the warm plastic surface. His nose positioned itself directly above Mason's chest, separated by only inches of medical-grade material. And then he did something that no one in that room would ever forget. He began to breathe. Slow, deep, rhythmic breaths that seemed to carry intention within them. Each inhale lasted exactly 3 seconds. Each exhale matched it perfectly. The pattern was so precise, so deliberate, that it could not have been accidental. Kodi was not simply resting his head on the incubator. He was doing something purposeful. Something that looked almost like a ritual. Jessica watched in stunned silence as the dog's breathing synchronized with the monitors tracking her son's vital signs. At first, she thought it was coincidence. The machines beeped at regular intervals and Kodi's rhythm just happened to align with them. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, she realized that the opposite was true. The monitors were adjusting to match Kodi. Mason's heart rate, which had been erratic and weak for days, began to stabilize into a stronger, more consistent pattern. His oxygen levels, which had required constant supplementation, started to climb on their own. The readings that Dr. Chun had described as minimal began to show activity that had not been present during the morning assessment. "That's not possible," Jake muttered under his breath, his eyes fixed on the changing numbers. "That's not medically possible." But it was happening. Right there in room 214 of St. Luke's Regional Medical Center, something was occurring that defied every textbook explanation. A police dog with no medical training was somehow influencing the vital signs of a critically ill infant through nothing more than proximity and breath. Jessica fell to her knees beside the incubator, her hands pressed against the glass, her eyes locked on her son's face. She had memorized every feature during those 19 days of vigil. The curve of his cheeks. The tiny nose that looked exactly like his father's. The closed eyelids that had never once flickered with recognition or awareness. She knew that face better than she knew her own reflection. Which is why she noticed immediately when something changed. It was subtle at first. A slight tension in the muscles around Mason's mouth. A barely perceptible shift in the position of his head. The kind of movement that could have been dismissed as involuntary reflex. The random firing of damaged neurons that meant nothing at all. But Jessica was his mother. And mothers know the difference between accident and intention. She held her breath as Kodi continued his strange, rhythmic breathing. She watched as the Texas sun, hidden behind clouds for days, finally broke through and sent a shaft of golden light streaming through the gap in the blinds. It fell across the incubator like a spotlight, illuminating her son's face with warmth that had been absent from this room since the moment they arrived. And in that light, Mason James Parker opened his eyes. Not the unfocused, glassy stare that doctors had warned her was possible in patients with severe neurological damage. These eyes were different. They were aware. They were searching. They moved with purpose until they found the source of the warmth and breath above them. They found Kodi. For one endless, breathless moment, the baby and the dog looked at each other through the plastic barrier of the incubator. Something passed between them that no one else in the room could see or understand. A recognition that transcended species and circumstance. A connection that had been forged in some invisible realm beyond human comprehension. And then Mason did something that made Jessica's heart stop completely. His left hand, the tiny fist that had remained motionless since birth, slowly uncurled. His fingers stretched outward with obvious effort, trembling but determined. And before anyone could react, before anyone could fully process what they were witnessing, that hand reached up and pressed against the incubator glass. Directly beneath Kodi's nose. Jessica screamed. Not in fear, but in overwhelming, uncontrollable joy. She screamed so loudly that nurses came running from down the hall, their footsteps pounding against the linoleum floor. She screamed until her throat went raw and her vision blurred with tears that would not stop falling. Her son had moved. After 19 days of silence, Mason James Parker had responded to something. He had reached out to something. He had proven that somewhere beneath the medical diagnoses and the neurological assessments and the overwhelming grief, he was still there. Fighting. Waiting. Alive. But as the nurses burst through the door and the alarms began to sound and chaos erupted in that small hospital room, no one noticed the expression on Officer Jake Mendez's face. No one saw the way his hands trembled as he reached for his phone. No one understood why he suddenly looked like a man who had just witnessed something terrifying. Because Jake knew Kodi better than anyone. He had studied that dog's behavior for 7 years. He understood what every posture and every sound meant. And right now, Kodi was not celebrating. The dog had stepped back from the incubator, his mission apparently complete. But instead of relaxing into the satisfied calm that usually followed a successful track, his body had gone rigid again. His ears were flattened. His tail was low. And his eyes had shifted from the baby to somewhere else entirely. He was staring at the window. At the gray sky beyond. At something invisible that only he could sense. And the low, mournful whine had returned. Softer this time. Almost a whisper. But unmistakable. Kodi had saved the baby. Jake was certain of that now. But something else was wrong. Something connected to this family that extended far beyond the walls of room 214. Something that made the dog's hackles rise and his body tremble with an unease that Jake had never witnessed before. What had Kodi sensed? And why did he suddenly look so afraid? The chaos in room 214 was overwhelming. Nurses rushed in with urgent footsteps, their voices overlapping in a symphony of medical terminology and barely contained disbelief. Dr. Elizabeth Chun arrived within minutes, her white coat billowing behind her as she pushed through the growing crowd of staff members who had gathered at the doorway. Word had spread through the pediatric unit like wildfire. The Parker baby was responding. The infant who had shown no voluntary movement for 19 days had suddenly opened his eyes and reached out his hand. It was impossible. Everyone knew it was impossible. And yet the monitors confirmed what they were all witnessing with their own eyes. Dr. Chun moved directly to the incubator, her trained gaze scanning the readings with practiced efficiency. Heart rate had stabilized at a level she had not seen since Mason's birth. Oxygen saturation was climbing without additional support. And the neurological indicators that had remained flatlined for nearly 3 weeks were now showing sporadic but undeniable activity. She checked the equipment for malfunction. She reviewed the medication logs for any recent changes. She searched for any rational explanation that would allow her to make sense of what she was seeing. There was none. "Get me a full neurological workup," she ordered, her voice tight with controlled confusion. "I want brain scans, motor response tests, everything. And someone tell me why there is a dog in my NICU." Jake stepped forward, Kodi's leash now firmly in his grip. The dog had allowed himself to be pulled back from the incubator without resistance, as if he understood that his work was complete. But that strange, unsettled energy still radiated from his tense body. His eyes kept drifting toward the window, toward something beyond the glass that no one else could perceive. Officer Jake Mendez, ma'am. Austin Police Department K-9 Unit. I apologize for the intrusion. My partner broke protocol and entered the room without authorization. I take full responsibility. Dr. Chen turned to look at the Belgian Malinois, her expression a mixture of irritation and reluctant curiosity. She had heard stories about therapy animals producing unexplained results in patients. She had read studies about dogs detecting cancer and predicting seizures. But she had never seen anything like this. A police dog with no medical training had somehow triggered a response in a patient that her entire team had failed to reach for nearly 3 weeks. Get him out of here, she said finally, turning back to her patient. We need to run tests. Whatever happened in this room, we need to understand it before we can determine what it means. Jake nodded and began guiding Kodi toward the door. But Jessica Parker suddenly reached out and grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman who had barely eaten in days. Wait, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Please wait. I need to know what just happened. I need to understand why your dog came here. Why he knew to come to this room. Why my son responded to him when he hasn't responded to anything else. Jake looked down at Jessica's hand on his arm, then up at her tear-streaked face. He saw desperation there, but also something else. A hunger for answers that he understood all too well. Because he had the same questions. He had been working with Kodi for 7 years, and he thought he understood everything about his partner's abilities. But what happened in this room went beyond tracking sense and detecting danger. This was something else entirely. Something that made Jake question everything he believed about the bond between humans and animals. Ma'am, I wish I could explain it, he said honestly. But I've never seen Kodi do anything like this before. He tracked something here. He sensed something about your son that made him break every rule of his training. And whatever he did with that breathing, that positioning above your baby, I have no explanation for it. None at all. Jessica released his arm and turned back to the incubator, where nurses were carefully adjusting Mason's monitors and preparing him for the battery of tests that Dr. Chun had ordered. Her son's eyes had closed again, and his hand had returned to its resting position. But there was something different about him now. Something that Jessica could feel in her bones, even if she could not articulate it. He was still fighting. And now she knew he was winning. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of medical activity. Jake and Kodi were escorted to a waiting area down the hall, where hospital security kept a watchful eye on the police dog who had caused such an unprecedented disruption. Jake called his supervisor to explain the situation, stumbling over his words as he tried to describe what he had witnessed. His captain listened in skeptical silence, then instructed him to file a detailed report and return to the station as soon as the hospital cleared him to leave. But Jake could not leave. Something held him in that uncomfortable plastic chair, watching the parade of specialists who came and went from room 214. Something told him that this story was not over. That Kodi's strange behavior toward the window, that renewed whine of warning, meant that another chapter was about to unfold. At exactly 4:17 in the afternoon, his instinct proved correct. Dr. Chun emerged from room 214 with an expression that Jake had never seen on a physician's face before. It was not relief. It was not celebration. It was something closer to shock, tinged with an almost religious awe that seemed completely out of place on a woman of science. She walked directly to Jessica, who had been pacing the hallway outside her son's room, forbidden from entering during the testing process. The two women stood face to face for a long moment before Dr. Chun finally spoke. I don't know how to explain what I'm about to tell you, the doctor began, her voice uncharacteristically unsteady. We ran every test available to us. Brain scans, motor response evaluations, neurological assessments. We compared them to the results from this morning, from yesterday, from every day since Mason was admitted. Jessica held her breath, her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The improvement is unprecedented, Dr. Chun continued. Motor pathways that showed no activity 12 hours ago are now firing consistently. Brain regions that we believed were permanently damaged are showing signs of recovery. His responses to stimulation have increased dramatically. Mrs. Parker, I have been practicing medicine for 23 years, and I have never seen anything like this. Jessica's legs buckled beneath her, and she would have collapsed to the floor if Jake had not rushed forward to steady her. Tears streamed down her face as the meaning of Dr. Chen's words penetrated the fog of exhaustion and grief that had surrounded her for so long. "He's going to be okay," she whispered, afraid to speak the words too loudly in case they shattered like glass. Dr. Chen hesitated, and that pause sent a chill down Jake's spine. There was something else. Something the doctor was struggling to say. "The improvement is remarkable and encouraging," Dr. Chen said carefully. "But I need to be honest with you about what we found. The pattern of recovery doesn't match any known medical intervention. The timing, the specific areas of the brain that are responding, the way the motor pathways are reactivating, none of it follows the expected trajectory for this type of injury." "What does that mean?" Jessica asked, her voice rising with renewed anxiety. "It means we don't know what caused this. The only variable that changed today was the presence of that police dog. And while I cannot scientifically attribute your son's improvement to an animal breathing near his incubator, I also cannot explain it any other way. Something happened in that room that our instruments cannot measure. Something that our medical knowledge cannot account for." Jake felt Kodi press against his leg, the dog's body still tense with that unexplained unease. He looked down at his partner, searching those intelligent eyes for answers that he knew would not come. What had Kodi done? What had he sensed? And why was he still acting as if something was terribly wrong? Before Jake could pursue that thought, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen, expecting a message from his captain demanding his return to the station. But the notification was not from work. It was a news alert. His blood ran cold as he read the headline that flashed across his screen. "Breaking: U.S. military convoy ambushed in Eastern Province. Multiple casualties reported. Names being withheld pending family notification." Jake looked up at Jessica, who was still crying tears of joy over her son's miraculous improvement. She had not checked her phone in hours. She did not know what had just happened on the other side of the world. She had no idea that while she was celebrating Mason's recovery, something terrible might have occurred that would shatter her world all over again. And then Jake remembered something that made his stomach drop. Jessica's husband was deployed overseas. Sergeant David Parker. Third deployment. He had promised to be here for the birth of his son but was stationed 7,000 miles away, waiting desperately for good news about his critically ill child. Jake looked at the news alert again. Eastern Province. That was David's region. He knew because Jessica had mentioned it during their brief conversation in the hospital room. Her husband was supposed to be in that exact area. He looked down at Kodi, and for the first time, he understood what the dog had been sensing all along. The whine at the window. The way Kodi kept staring at the horizon. The lingering unease that refused to dissipate even after Mason showed signs of recovery. Kodi had not just detected something wrong with the baby. He had sensed something wrong with this entire family. Something that connected them across oceans and continents in ways that defied rational explanation. At that exact moment, Jessica's phone began to ring. She pulled it from her pocket with trembling hands, her tear-filled eyes struggling to read the caller ID. When she saw the number, her face went pale. It was a military prefix. The kind of call that families prayed they would never receive. The kind of call that changed everything. She looked at Jake with an expression of pure terror, and he saw the joy drain from her eyes as quickly as it had arrived. "Answer it," he said softly, though every part of him wanted to stop her. Wanted to protect her from whatever news waited on the other end of that line. Wanted to give her just a few more moments of hope before the next storm arrived. Jessica raised the phone to her ear with a shaking hand. "Hello." The voice on the other end spoke for less than 30 seconds. Jake could not hear the words, but he did not need to. He watched Jessica's face transform from fear to confusion to something he could not identify. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. And then the phone slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. She turned to Jake with an expression of absolute shock. "David flatlined," she whispered, her voice barely audible. 19 seconds. They brought him back, but he was gone for 19 seconds. Jake felt the world tilt beneath his feet. 19 seconds. The same amount of time Mason had stopped breathing during his traumatic delivery. The same number that had been haunting this family since the moment everything went wrong. "When?" he managed to ask, though he already knew the answer. Jessica's eyes filled with fresh tears as she spoke the words that would keep them both awake for many nights to come. This morning, at the exact moment your dog walked into my son's room, the world stopped making sense in that hospital corridor. Jessica stood frozen, her phone lying forgotten on the cold linoleum floor, her mind struggling to process the impossible connection that had just revealed itself. 19 seconds. Her husband had died for 19 seconds on a battlefield 7,000 miles away. And at that exact moment, a police dog she had never met walked into her son's hospital room and triggered a recovery that no doctor could explain. The coincidence was too precise. The timing was too perfect. This was not random chance. This was something else entirely. Something that bound her family together across oceans and continents in ways that science could never measure. Jake helped Jessica to a nearby chair, his own hands trembling as he guided her down. Kodi sat at his feet, finally calm now that the truth had been revealed. The dog's ears were relaxed. His breathing had returned to normal. Whatever storm he had sensed approaching, it had arrived and passed. The worst was over. Both Mason and David were alive, and somehow, impossibly, their survival was connected by the same invisible thread that had drawn Kodi to room 214. The next few hours unfolded in a series of phone calls and tearful conversations. Jessica spoke with David's commanding officer, who confirmed that her husband had been injured in an ambush that morning. An improvised explosive device had detonated near his convoy, throwing him from the vehicle and stopping his heart for those fateful 19 seconds. Medics had performed CPR in the field, refusing to give up even when the situation seemed hopeless. They brought him back just as the sun was breaking through the clouds over Austin, Texas. Just as Kodi lowered his head to Mason's incubator and began that strange rhythmic breathing. David was stable now. He would need surgery and months of rehabilitation, but he was expected to make a full recovery. The same words Dr. Chun had used to describe Mason just hours earlier. Two members of the same family, separated by an ocean, fighting for their lives at the exact same moment, both pulling through against impossible odds. Jessica called David that evening from a hospital room, her phone propped against a pillow so he could see Mason's face through the video screen. The baby's eyes were open again, tracking movement, responding to his mother's voice in ways that had seemed impossible just that morning. David watched from his hospital bed in Germany, bandages covering the wounds that would eventually become scars, tears streaming down his weathered face as he saw his son truly alive for the first time. "Hey, little man," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Daddy's coming home. I promise. I'm coming home to you." Mason's hand moved. Not the dramatic reach he had made toward Kodi, but a small, deliberate gesture. His fingers curled and uncurled as if responding to his father's voice across the digital connection. Jessica sobbed with joy, and somewhere on the other side of the world, David did the same. 3 months later, everything had changed. Mason James Parker was discharged from St. Luke's Regional Medical Center on a bright February morning. The same nurses who had whispered about hospice care now lined the hallway to cheer as Jessica carried her son toward the exit. Dr. Elizabeth Chun walked beside her, still shaking her head in wonder at the recovery she had witnessed. She had written a detailed case study about Mason's improvement, submitting it to medical journals across the country. The response had been overwhelming. Researchers wanted to study the case. Therapy animal organizations requested interviews. The story of the police dog who sensed what machines could not had captured the imagination of the medical community. David came home 2 weeks after his son. He walked off the plane at Austin Bergstrom International Airport with a noticeable limp and a scar that ran from his left shoulder to his elbow. But his eyes were bright, and his smile was wider than Jessica had ever seen it. He had survived. His son had survived. And somehow, they had done it together, connected by something that neither of them fully understood. The reunion at their small house in Cedar Park was everything Jessica had dreamed about during those 19 dark days in the hospital. David held Mason for the first time, cradling the baby against his chest with the careful tenderness of a man who understood exactly how precious life could be. He breathed in the scent of his son's hair. He counted each tiny finger and toe. He whispered promises about the future they would build together, about baseball games and birthday parties and all the ordinary moments that had once seemed so far out of reach. That afternoon, Officer Jake Mendez stopped by with Kodi. Jessica had invited them weeks earlier, insisting that she needed to thank the dog who had saved her son in ways no one could explain. Jake had hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate to intrude on such a personal moment. But something told him that Kodi needed this closure as much as the Parker family did. The dog had been different since that day at St. Luke's. Quieter. More contemplative. As if the experience had changed him in fundamental ways that even his handler could not fully grasp. When they arrived at the small blue house with the freshly painted nursery, Kodi walked directly to where David sat on the couch with Mason in his arms. The dog's approach was gentle, almost reverent, just as it had been in the hospital room 3 months earlier. He stopped a few feet away and looked up at the father and son with those intelligent, knowing eyes. David felt tears welling up as he met the dog's gaze. He had heard the story a dozen times from Jessica. He had read the news articles and watched the local television segments about the miracle at St. Luke's. But seeing Kodi in person, understanding that this animal had somehow bridged the gap between his dying son and his own failing heart, was almost more than he could bear. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how you did it. I don't know why you came. But thank you for saving my boy." Kodi stepped forward and rested his head on David's knee, directly beside Mason's tiny body. The baby's eyes opened at the familiar presence, and for a long moment, the three of them remained perfectly still. Father, son, and the dog who had brought them both back from the edge of oblivion. Jake watched from across the room, his own eyes glistening with tears he refused to let fall. He had been a police officer for 15 years. He had seen the worst of humanity. He had witnessed tragedy and violence and senseless loss. But he had also learned that sometimes, in the spaces between heartbreak and hope, miracles could happen. They did not always make sense. They could not always be explained. But they were real, and they mattered, and they reminded everyone who witnessed them that life was more mysterious and beautiful than anyone could fully comprehend. Jessica served coffee and told the story again, filling in details that Jake had not known. How the chaplain had visited twice before Kodi's arrival. How she had been ready to give up hope entirely. How the moment that dog walked into her son's room, something shifted in the very air around them. She spoke about the connection between David and Mason, about the 19 seconds that had nearly claimed them both, about the invisible bond that had somehow pulled them back from darkness at the exact same moment. As Jake prepared to leave that evening, Jessica walked him to the door and took his hands in hers. "I've been thinking about what happened," she said quietly. "About why Kodi came to us. About what it all means. And I think I finally understand." Jake waited, letting her gather her thoughts. "Dogs don't see the world the way we do," Jessica continued. "They don't understand borders or distance or the separation between people who love each other. They just sense connection. They feel the threads that bind us together across space and time. And when those threads are threatened, when the people on either end are slipping away, they respond." She paused, her eyes moving to where Kodi sat patiently beside his handler. Kodi didn't just save Mason that day. He saved David too. He sensed that our family was breaking apart, and he refused to let it happen. He breathed life into my son while my husband's heart was stopping on the other side of the world. And somehow, through some miracle that none of us will ever fully understand, he kept them both alive long enough to find their way back to each other. Jake nodded slowly, understanding finally dawning. Kodi had not just detected a dying child in that hospital room. He had sensed a family in crisis. A father and son connected by blood and love and the desperate will to survive. And he had done the one thing his training never prepared him for. He had chosen to intervene in a battle that was not his to fight. As Jake walked toward his patrol car with Kodi at his side, he looked up at the Texas sky, now painted with the deep oranges and purples of approaching sunset. He thought about all the cases he and Kodi had worked together. All the criminals they had tracked and the missing persons they had found. But none of it compared to what happened in room 214 of St. Luke's Regional Medical Center. Because that was the day he learned that the bond between living beings was stronger than medicine, deeper than science, and more powerful than death itself. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that miracles still happen and that love can bridge any distance, then I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button and join this family, because every week we share stories that prove hope is never lost. Drop a comment below and tell me what you believe. Was it instinct? Was it coincidence? Or was it something far more powerful that connected Kodi to Mason and David on that fateful morning? Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who might be losing hope and needs a reminder that the universe works in mysterious ways. And if you want to see what happened when Kodi returned to the Parker family 2 years later for an event that shocked everyone involved, That story is coming very soon, and you will not want to miss it. Thank you for watching, thank you for believing, and remember, sometimes the greatest miracles come with 4 legs and a heart bigger than anyone expects.